I'd like to speak about some texts which I believe help to show what can happen when a person ends up starving for acceptance and encouragement from those he cares about. Those passages are in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 7 through 8. The context of these passages deals with a man who had fallen into sin and had been put out of the church, and it seems he had come to repentance, and now Paul is instructing the church to forgive him and to receive him back into their community. We read in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 7 through 8. So you should rather turn to forgive and comfort him, or he may be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. So I beg you to reaffirm your love for him. Paul speaks of this man being overwhelmed with sorrow. The word for overwhelmed here is the idea of being devoured or destroyed by something. This word overwhelmed is the same word that is used to speak of what the devil desires to do as a roaring lion to other Christians, namely, devour them. 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 8, we read, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour." It's not as though he desires to just hurt or frustrate us, but to devour or destroy us. And this is the same word Paul uses to speak of the effects that a great amount of sorrow might have on this one man, namely that he could be devoured or destroyed or overwhelmed by the sorrow. Obviously, this tells us that Paul is speaking of a sorrow that is very severe, extremely painful, something that entails a lot of anguish and mental torment, possibly, maybe even deep chronic depression. One has even suggested that Paul could be speaking of a kind of sorrow that could be so severe that this poor man could be tempted to commit suicide. What I want to draw your attention to now is what Paul feared might cause this man's sorrow. Based on what we see in these passages, it would basically be a lack of forgiveness, a lack of comfort, and a lack of love on the part of those the man cared about, namely those in the church. See, Paul wanted the church to forgive this man, to help him, and to confirm their love to him. They were to embrace him once again, affirm him for who he was as a child of God. And Paul's fear was that if they did not do this, the man could end up consumed with sorrow. Although the context is dealing with a man who is repentant, needing to be forgiven and affirmed after having sinned, we see some general principles in regard to a Christian's mental health that are instructive for us to consider. Number one, we see that it's possible for a Christian who is not in sin to have chronic depression, to be overwhelmed with sorrow, if not even be destroyed by sorrow. I want to stress this because there are some who might argue that there is no reason why any believer should ever be in despair and have depression. I think I've heard it said that a depressed Christian is a walking contradiction, or he's just a poor advertisement for Christianity. Paul did not seem to have that opinion in these passages, as he says nothing to imply that this repentant man would be at fault for being so sorrowful. Number two, in these passages, we see that one of the causes of chronic depression in the Christian may be due to tension that could exist in their relationships with loved ones, or simply an absence of good relationships, where the Christian is not feeling loved or cared for and valued. This is because of the fact that a person's mental health, their emotional well-being, is intimately dependent on feeling accepted by others, particularly loved ones. The text which emphasizes the great dependency people tend to have on others is Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 10, where Solomon says, "But woe to him who is alone when he falls, and has not another to lift him up." This certainly applies to someone who falls down emotionally and is depressed and crushed. For if they have no one to pick them up, to encourage them, to affirm them, like this man Paul is speaking of, that person may never recover. They may stay down and be consumed with so much sorrow. So they are left devastated and possibly left more prone to falling into various destructive ways of coping. Number three, in light of the first 2 points, it's important to be very sensitive to someone who might be struggling with depression, someone who may feel a lot of sorrow due to loneliness and isolation or some other affliction. Paul seemed very sensitive to the depression this poor repentant man might experience, and so ought we with other people in our lives who may be depressed as well. We are to be very careful not to make light of a person's sorrow and simplify it by rallying off some well-meaning cliche or giving some spiritual sounding advice. For example, it might not be helpful to charge such a depressed Christian with the idea that they only need to lean on Christ and go to him and maybe pray for the fruit of the Spirit, that somehow God is going to do a mighty work in them and produce joy. Paul gives no indication in this text that this man could be delivered by this great sorrow by leaning on Christ. If it was possible for this man to have his pain lessened or be completely healed, why doesn't Paul say anything to suggest that? Why doesn't he just take this as an opportunity to instruct him and the church and all of us how we can survive being overcome with sorrow by just praying to God and trusting God. Instead, Paul just makes it clear that if the church does not receive and accept this man, it may result in him drowning in emotional suffering. Paul puts the responsibility on the church to receive this man and treat him appropriately, to confirm their love for him. Paul is so concerned for this man that we read that he begs the church of Corinth to confirm their love for him. Again, we read in chapter 2, verses 8, "So I beg you to reaffirm your love for him." In light of all that's been said, let us seek to be compassionate to those who may be struggling with depression and to hopefully keep other people from potentially succumbing to being overwhelmed with sorrow. Let us be ready and willing to forgive and to comfort, to affirm, and to express our love to others.